sipping on that scissor, right? What a way to start. Look at Gangsta Steve.
I'm so gangster, man.
Lean back.
It's true. There's no denying it.
Yeah.
Oh,
We won't go into-
there you go.
Yeah, the only symbols I know
man.
how to throw, man.
Oh, man.
can't do
Hey,
that.
I don't even
Dave, can
know
you take
how
us
to deal
out,
with
please?
this anymore. Yeah, that's
Take
it.
us out, please.
Mic drop. We're done. That's as much as I can take.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I was saying at the when we started this call to Isaac that I have been waiting for months, as you all know, to finally have a discussion about the Stoned Ape Theory, which he reminded me was only part of what he's going to bring to the table tonight. Nonetheless, I'm looking forward to it, and I am also joined by Steve. Throw up a peace sign,
Wait.
Steve, or whatever.
I
Gangster Steve.
don't know what symbol to do.
Just stop.
Yeah,
Just
that's
stop.
it. That's all I got.
Just stop. And the lovely Shannon Q. Hello.
Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? We good?
9, and then Jimmy and I will be back on Sunday for another edition of Hairline there. And then next week is going to be quite the week. I'm going to wait until Sunday and let you guys know what we've got coming up. But we've got a couple of new things next week that I think you're going to really dig. I just said dig, didn't I? I don't know why I just said
I don't know
dig.
what's happening anymore.
Very 80-ish.
I'm leaving.
We're going off in too many different decades here. Dig is from like what, the 70s? Groovy.
60s, 70s, and 80s. Yeah, they're still around.
Yeah, I dug that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad someone did. Steve, tell everybody what you've got coming up tomorrow with Trump.
Tomorrow, around 2 o'clock Pacific, 3 o'clock, we're going to be doing the Trump Hangout, going over to Mueller. How do people pronounce his name anymore? I've been saying like 6 different ways. Mueller. That's what I say too. But people like saying it was like Mueller, and I'm like, I thought it was Mueller. But yeah, we're going to go over that and the Attorney General Barr's testimony in front of the Senate and a few other things to see if Trump really did commit obstruction of justice or collusion. I'm under the guise that he did, and listening to the Barr testimony was just excruciating. The guy's a wordsmith. I'll give him that. He was splitting words left and right to try. You could tell that he was not happy to be there and trying to think of any possible way to not implicate himself with anything that was a lie, but it was sort of stretching the truth.
No collusion. Shannon, anything you got coming up?
Within the next, hopefully, week to week and a half, I'm going to be putting out the next Christian counseling video. And I also have a talk coming up next Tuesday with Ben Shetner on my channel, who was one of the co-hosts of Creation Today with Eric Hovind. And I've got Women of Deconversion on the Secular Hangouts channel that's going to be on the 13th of May. So not this Monday coming, but the following. I'm everywhere. I'm all over the place.
I really liked your talk with Holy Kool-Aid too. If you haven't checked that out, everyone, you need to check that out. That was really good, very good.
Thanks. It was an interesting conversation. We had a conversation the night before, just out on the patio, having a couple of drinks at his house. A large group of us were having a chat, and we were like, "Why don't we have a microphone for this?" And we were like, "Let's take it to the streets." So we decided.
I did a couple of drinks.
I never asked you, Shannon. Did you wind up making your way out of that apartment complex?
Yes, I did, because you know why? Because Thomas drove us home.
Okay.
That's why.
Literally, everyone. I got lost in this apartment complex because
like
the gate wouldn't open. Like the gate wouldn't open for the car, so I got out and went in through the walking gate, and my GPS only took me to like the beginning gate. So literally I wandered behind this huge apartment complex for like 45 minutes. And I bet I looked shady as shit, like with my phone and lights going up to the building saying, what number is this? Because you couldn't see the numbers on the apartment complex on the side of it.
Were you wearing your gnome hat and beard? Because that would have been...
No, he was texting me, and he wouldn't let me get him help. and he found a cat.
Because I was not going to call Thomas and be like, I can't find your apartment and be like that guy. So I was going to find it myself. And then when I'm walking into I finally found the place, and I'm walking into the apartment building, and this black cat walks straight in front of me and just sits down, and then starts having like some kind of I don't know, what would you call that, Shannon? I sent Shannon a video and I was like, what do I do? Funny.
He wanted you to pet
Funny.
him. That's all.
And I
was just
did.
being affectionate.
Speaking of Dave putting up pictures, Dave, we put up this the picture I just sent you. Following this stream, you will be able to. This has importance. This has importance. But following this stream, on the channel, we'll be premiering the unedited footage. On the Atheist Edge, you'll be able to see Shannon and I attempt to do a game show, but only here will you be able to see the unedited full attempt at us trying to ask Bible questions.
We had 8 questions, and it took us like 45 minutes because you're a nightmare.
Yeah. It's hilarious.
I love that suit, by the way. That's cream color and beige and brown. That's an awesome suit color.
Yeah. Make sure that you stick around and watch that immediately following tonight, because you will not be sorry that you did, and you'll be able to see Shannon go full Shannon. So.
Hey.
God damn it. Oh my God, no.
I'm the problem.
You're the problem.
Okay.
Oh my God, you're a nightmare.
Isaac, why don't you take a second and introduce yourself and tell everybody why we are here and what we're going to be talking about.
Sure. So I wanted to thank you guys for letting me show up to present my research. I actually research entheogens for The Ohio State University. But no one knows what the term entheogen is, so I always have to follow up with an entheogen is just a psychedelic. So it's just a nice term for psychedelic that we can use that means generating the divine within. So it's like a nice colloquial term to be able to describe it. But basically what we're going to be discussing tonight is how different psychedelics can produce a mental state that is objective and consistent, and that gives evidence that the dimensional landscape that the psychedelic can take you to is actually real. So it's objectively verifiable, and this can be put under research methods, and you can actually open it up to experimental measures. So we'll talk about some of that. The way that I actually got introduced to this whole thing was pretty crazy. I was actually watching DMT the Spirit Molecule, which is a documentary that was produced by Joe Rogan and Rick Strassman. So he did the DMT trials in the 90s. And so for anyone who isn't aware, DMT is a hallucinogen that it's a very powerful psychedelic that's produced within the human brain. So we call that endogenous. So endogenous means produced within the human body. So there's a lot of rumors going around about DMT, but I was hoping that we could discredit some of those and talk about what the actual reality is behind it.
Excellent. Would it be accurate to say that you feel that consciousness is? I saw this analogy and I thought that this might be appropriate here. It's sort of like Wi-Fi, and we are the receivers. It's something that's always there. It's not something that's within the brain, but we sort of connect to it.
Yes, actually, I would word it just about the same way. I think that we receive consciousness and that it's non-localized. So that's usually the term that we use is non-local consciousness, because if it was local, it'd be confined to the individual body. So that is an accurate description.
Okay, so why don't you take us through why it is that you believe this is the case?
Sure, I'm glad you asked. So I went to Brazil in 2017 as part of an anthropological expedition to research ayahuasca. So ayahuasca is a shamanic brew that contains DMT. So people used to drink it ceremonially for thousands of years to connect with their ancestors, reportedly. I don't know about all that, but you know, all kinds of different shamanic uses for ayahuasca for many years, healing properties, that kind of stuff, rooted in mysticism. So I went there to study this church, the Church of Santo Daime. Santo Daime means holy wine. And legalized to use ayahuasca in the United States. So that's one of the reasons I went to investigate them, because I thought, oh, I could have an ayahuasca church in Ohio if this all went smoothly. So I went down to Brazil and I stayed with these people, and they had this decentralized eco-village platform. So basically they were self-sufficient, all the while running their own conscious community. They had this interesting rumor. I don't particularly pertain to this, but they thought that Jesus turned water into ayahuasca, because ayahuasca is a wine. So it would make sense that he made a drink that ascends your consciousness rather than one that, you know, like alcohol inhibits it. I think that might be taking things too far, but it's certainly interesting local lore. So while I was there in Brazil, before going, I was actually more agnostic. I would say agnostic atheist, actually. So while not believing I could know, believe there probably wasn't a God or a collective conscious or whatever you want to call it. But after having this experience of personal subjectivity with the non-localized consciousness, with the source, as people call it, I believed that it was true from my own experience, but I didn't necessarily think that was enough. Because a lot of people can experience something that they believe is true, but just because you believe something that you experience is true yourself doesn't actually mean that it's true. So following up from those experiences and the internal conviction that it changed me to believe that these outer realms were possible, or maybe better worded inner realms, I decided to do some more investigation into the actual nature of the DMT landscape. So DMT is actually derived from an essential amino acid. It's derived from tryptophan. So amino acids build up proteins, so they're in all life. So DMT is in all life. It's in plants, animals, humans, pretty much everything. So if DMT is the connection of consciousness between the individual and the spiritual realm, it would be really the only thing that has a candidacy for that, because it's the only endogenous entheogen that exists. So when we think about DMT, there's a lot of misconceptions. A lot of people think it's produced by the pineal gland or the third eye. Well, actually, that's not true. DMT is produced by the lungs, which makes sense because when you focus on your breathing or meditation, you have a transcendental state. So it would make sense that that's activated through an entheogen that's produced by the lungs. So that's one degree of fantasy that exists. But also people believe that DMT produces near-death experiences. But this is also not the case. The reason why people believe this is because DMT is highly correlated with a near-death experience. There was recently a double-blind research placebo study published in Journals of Neuropsychology. It's a very well-respected journal. The index citation is about 4. That's how often it gets cited by other journals. So it's a pretty well-respected academic work. And it talked about how DMT correlates to the DMT hyperspace with near-death experiences almost perfectly. And what they mean by that is they're expressing how people experience a similar subjective experience in terms of the landscape that they go to. So it seems like the same place. They experience similar entities, which we call autonomous entities, or we call disparate beings. More commonly, they're known as machine elves or something along that nature. And also people have an inner subjective experience. So their inner subjective experience is feeling like they're the essence of a soul, that they're at the place where souls await rebirth, backwards through their own DNA into another universe. You know, the way that I most famously heard it quoted was it was like intensely propelled molecular introspection. But then I asked what that guy meant by that. He had no clue. But it's a good way of describing how it's consistent, but it's also a little bit variable in terms of individual perception. So that can be a little bit confusing. But I would make that comparison to if you have like 3 aliens and you send them to different parts of the Earth, right? They're in different areas like China, the US, or South America. So there are different variables in those settings, but there are consistencies too. One sun, one moon, gravity, that kind of thing. So that's what this research was showing. So here's the thing. If DMT produced a near-death experience, then none of that matters because, a near-death experience is like DMT, but they're both caused by the same thing. They're caused by the same activational methods in the brain. So they would be, who cares? DMT causes both of them. It's not very surprising. Now, the interesting thing in the research is that they're actually caused by different things. Near-death experiences is caused by the activation of kappa opioid receptors and asphyxiation. So DMT does not cause near-death experiences. However, it still creates the same consistent objective experience as a DMT state when you have an out-of-body experience that's facilitated through a near-death experience. So since these similar states are so consistent but are caused by different brain mechanisms, it's more evident that the dimension that it takes you to is consistent and objective and likely a real place that you can actually go to.
Okay, there's a lot there. Which between the two of you want to, Steve, you want to address the ontology, then we'll go to Shannon?
Sure.
Yeah, I can kind of ask about the ontology. Now, you're describing what's called a breakthrough. When people have DMT and they have a breakthrough, they experience certain things that they have in common. One of the things they call machine elves or jesters, right? These are these supposedly ontological creatures that either exist as a literalist. A literalist would say that ontologically these are real beings. From what you described, you are under that impression, right? That you think that when you have a breakthrough and you're talking or seeing one of these jesters or machine elves, that is a being that exists independently of your own brain states, right?
Yes, that's why we call it an autonomous entity. So it exists outside of your own personal consciousness.
Okay, and some of the other viewpoints that people have talked about with DMT are more of a constructivist approach, which is called a neurotheological reductionism. And what that is basically saying that we have different things as individuals, that we all, as a society, have things in common. And so we see things that are going to be very similar. So there's different stages of the ontology of what people think the DMT trip is occurring, right? So you have, if I remember correctly, you have neurotheological reductionism, perennialism, contextualism, essentialism, and literalism. Am I right?
Right.
I'm pulling deep here. Because I've looked in this before, and I tend to the constructivist approach because I don't think they are autonomous. However, I'm really interested in on if they are autonomous. How would you go about making that determination? And because you said objective, which is basically this could be verified by anybody, right? It's not something that you individually have a subjective experience. Like a toothache is subjective. I can't share it with anybody. But here you're saying this experience can be shared and they can experience the same exact things in the same way, correct?
Yes. Well, the subjective experiences are already that consistent. However, there's no actual verification that those subjective experiences are caused by, even though they're caused by different brain mechanisms, like I covered earlier, I'm not sure how likely it is that different brain mechanisms could still produce the same state. So it's still not actually proof that even though all these subjective experiences are so similar, kind of like archetypes, doesn't actually mean that we have any complete verification.
This is
but
where
I think we can get it.
Would ask Shannon why we would have similar
I'm like,
things.
What do you mean by brain mechanisms?
So what I mean by brain mechanisms is I mean how the actual state is produced within the human brain. So for near-death experiences, it's caused by a combination of kappa opioid receptor activation, which is what ketamine activates, which can produce near-death experiences, or similar states like that, but not to the degree DMT does, and asphyxiation and a couple other variables depending on how you got into your near-death experience, but adrenaline is released, epinephrine, the fight or flight response. That's near-death experiences, right?
Amygdala activation. Those are all different mechanisms within the brain. So if you activate a flight or fight response, it's your amygdala being activated. So DMT, to the best of our knowledge, is a sigma-1 antagonist on the endoplasmic reticulum, which means that it's a serotonin agonist in the neural level. And serotonin,
that's correct.
So serotonin, when it's increased in levels and floods your brain, can create perceptual hallucinations, which is why it's a hallucinogenic. So it's very interesting to me that like correlation isn't causation, right? There's a third variable issue. So when you're looking at the fact that this is creating brain states that are hallucinogenic, all you can really say is that there's consistent hallucinogenic states that are being caused by the same substance. I don't understand how you get from there to there's a higher plane that we must be tapping into, because most of these things can be explained perceptually, culturally, through learning, and through cognitive understanding of culture and things of that nature.
Well, that's a great point. So first off, near-death experiences are not near-death experiences. Fight or flight stimulation is affiliated with epinephrine response. So that's produced by right above the kidney. And it does stimulate. Right, and it does stimulate the amygdala. That's true. But okay, so near-death experiences are not caused by DMT, right? We just described how they are produced in the brain, right? No DMT involved. DMT has a half-life of about 5 minutes, and it's broken down by an enzyme in the human body called monoamine oxidase, which is why in ayahuasca you need an MAOI, monoamine oxidase inhibitor, for it to work like, the 4 hours that you want it to work. So when it comes to DMT having a role in near-death experiences, it's extremely unlikely. So what we were talking about earlier was how near-death experiences are produced. Also, dynorphin plays a little bit of a role in the activation of the kappa opioid receptors, but the whole point is that it's not caused by DMT. However, a near-death experience is consistently similar to a DMT experience. And so, like I said earlier, the DMT correlates the near-death experience model. That was a study that was done through Journals of Neuropsychology, and it shows how they're so consistent and similar, objectively similar, through the subjective interpretation of the experience. But they're caused by different things, right?
Like saying objective subjective. Because similar isn't exactly the same. So,
well, they're consistently there are consistent models that are similar within the DMT state and the near-death experience state. So a lot of people think that DMT is caused. Yeah, a lot of people think that DMT itself in the brain causes a near-death experience, but that is factually incorrect. It is other processes like we were describing earlier. So the kicker is that DMT can produce these states, and near-death experiences can produce these states, and these two different mechanisms of production for these mental schemas are the origin for these objective consistencies. So that's what's crazy. If it was just DMT producing consistent results, then your argument about the perceptualism would be validated, because it's one hallucinogenic substance acting on the same region of the brain producing the same thing. But since different brain activational methods are causing that same response, that's part of the evidence that it's actually objectively consistent, along with the subjective experience that everyone is
real quick. Could one of you real quick answer? The MAOI, normally when you take DMT, it metabolizes really, really quickly. So can you explain how the MAOI actually makes the metabolization slower, slows down the rate, so your DMT trip is a little bit longer, which I guess is like 20 minutes, give or take. Normally it would be a matter of minutes. So how does that actually affect that? Do you know the chemistry of that?
Sure. Yeah, well, monoamine oxidase in the human body is an enzyme that immediately breaks down tryptamine substances, which is why when you take an MAOI, you shouldn't be on any SSRIs. That's just because of an interaction that can happen. But you also shouldn't take cheese or dairy, because they have tryptophans in them. So when you eat those substances, monoamine oxidase is no longer activated. You can't break it down. You could have potential health problems. So at the same time, monoamine oxidase, the enzyme being blocked or inhibited, makes it to where it can't break down DMT. So that means DMT is not immediately destroyed from the monoamine oxidase, and instead of a 5 to 10 minute experience, you have around 4 hours. So it does accelerate the experience a lot.
It allows it to stay in the presynaptic gap rather than being taken away.
Isn't tryptophan what makes you sleepy on Thanksgiving?
Tryptophan, yes.
Yes. Well, you would have to eat a lot of turkey before you notice the effects.
As well. Yeah, but it's not quite the same.
I'm just
okay.
offering my knowledge. Go ahead, Chip.
I'm fascinated by where the correlation lies. Like, I'm not saying I know one way or the other. I don't think anybody really knows. But so essentially what you're saying, I want to kind of steelman you here to make sure that I'm completely understanding what your perception is. So you're saying we know that DMT, the experience, the subjective experience that people self-report when they, go on DMT, when they take DMT, when they have a trip on DMT, can map over the self-reports of people who have had near-death experiences. However, we've eliminated, and I don't think that we've completely eliminated DMT, but we know that it's not the primary antagonist when it comes to near-death experiences. However, those two experiences can map onto each other conceptually. So people who have near-death experiences report similar experiences to people who have DMT who aren't near-death, who are just taking it to engage in some sort of spiritual engagement. Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct. And also DMT itself is more consistent than other hallucinogens. On LSD, you might have widely different experiences each time, although with some consistencies. DMT itself is more consistent on top of what you just described.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so what you're saying is, so what you're looking at, I'm guessing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is the fact that those two experiences, we perceive them as being sort of spiritual, because one's near death, so of course you're going to perceive that as kind of a spiritual experience. And DMT alters your state in such a way that you are open up and feel as though you're more one with the world. You have more stereotypically, conceptually spiritual experiences in both of these scenarios. And because people self-report the same sort of things, that you're kind of making the inference that both of them must be channeling some sort of higher plane that we're accessing. Otherwise, there's no reason for those experiences to be similar.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily put it like that. I don't say that this is the only answer. I think that there could be potential scientific and materialistic level explanations, but I do think that since we don't have those currently, that the existential implications of this metaphysical realm being verifiable is worth additional investigation. So I've actually developed some research methods that could actually test this directly.
Tell me those. I'd love to hear those. Yes, please. Tell me those.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, tell me the research methodology. Let's go. Let's party. I'm a nerd.
Perfect.
Let's nerd out.
Great. So I actually have a few, and this is nice because these are just some that I've developed as an undergraduate. So the ones that I develop once I'm actually in the field of medicine as a practicing physician researcher will be better, but these ones aren't bad. And this one I have, if it works, it's definite proof. So I'll stop teasing you and I'll tell you what it is. Yeah. So basically, all right. So this is I can't wait to do this research project because it is going to be dope. Okay. So here's the study. So what I want to do is I want to get people who are experienced with the psychedelic state, because if I get people who aren't ready for that kind of experience, it would be borderline unethical to give them an injection of the strongest psychedelic known to man. So get people who are a little experienced. Yeah, and you have two. I want this to be approved from the IRB, so we're going to draft it right. Also,
you may have to go back to South America.
Yeah, I'm nerding out way too hard right now.
Good luck with the ethics part. I still want to hear it though.
Well,
go ahead.
Rick Strassman did inject people with DMT in the 90s, and that's what caused DMT, the spirit molecule, to be produced as a documentary. And just as a side note, he told them, "Hey, you just had a trip. None of that was real. What happened?" They're like, "Not real. That was the most real thing I've ever felt." And he got freaked out. He was like, "Dude, no, chill." And they're like, "That was more real than real." It got him his wheels turning. But anyway, so the research study is you have two groups, right? And so you have one group go to the DMT state after being injected with intravenous DMT, or that's pretty much what we're going to have to do so that they can stay there for a while. And then we have another group also injected. So we send one group, right? And there's I actually have a research draft for this study, but it's too, it's just like made for this, so I'll kind of simplify it. You basically send the first person to tell one of the discarnate beings, which are known to be able to channel communication to the individual through not language, but like more of like a telepathy thing. You have them communicate to the discarnate entity or the machine elf or whatever, a number, let's say 23, right? And you have somebody else go to the dimensional landscape and ask what the number was. And so if you can verify that there was no communication between these two individuals, however, the communication transfer happened solely within the dimensional landscape, then you would show that the actual dimension is objectively real, and that is one potential way of verifying it. And there's no real other way that you could say that they initiated a transference of information unless it was random, which is why you repeat the study and do it double blind and have do like.
And you'd have to, in order to eliminate false positives, you'd have to probably pick something less arbitrary than a number that couldn't be accidentally hit upon. You'd probably have to pick something along the lines of,
a phrase,
like a random thing. Yeah, like a phrase, a name, something that isn't likely to be hit upon, because people could. There's a solid chance, especially if you're picking a number between like 1 and 30, like you just did, that people are going to accidentally stumble upon the number, and you're going to get more false positives. So if that's something that you're going to do, and you'd have to do them sequentially and keep them in entire isolation, so that you don't have them communicate the numbers with each other. Somebody in the chat just put 42. That would have been a perfect number.
And the password is.
What do these
funny
machine
story.
elves look like?
Discount garden gnome.
They look
the
like
number was
little
42,
gnomes.
brain explosion.
They
look like
yeah,
what?
discount garden gnome.
They
That's
look
going to
like
be the
little
objective
gnomes.
phrase.
They're like little elf
Oh,
gnomes,
for
kind of.
fuck's
So
sake.
and
did you
they're
have to say that?
tricky, which is why they're
You don't
called
under-
machine elves. So
Isaac,
I'm worried that they
understand.
might manipulate my study.
You just picked the worst words you could by saying gnome. Now the live chat
Yeah,
is just going to go.
Oh, you did
You're
say
assuming
that.
that you're assuming that these entities actually want to be a part of the study and actually give a crap rather than messing with people. You know?
Yeah, so that's the thing. They might be. You might go up and say a name, and someone else will be like, "Hey, did you say Donald D. Trump?" And they're like, "No, bro, we sent a random like John Doe name up there." Who knows what the machine elves are up to? But I do think it's a potential useful way to use numbers specifically, because if you have like a whole name, it could be hard for people to remember, because when you're in that kind of state, you're barely even in your conceptual awareness at all. But even if you did do numbers, you could always show that it's statistically significant of a correlation and is not due to chance. But that would just be, you know, statistics and research methods and stuff like that. But funny story about the numbers, you mentioned 42.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just
What'd
going to
you
say, do you
say?
have blind feeding? You have blind feeding and blind recovery. So, like, if you knew the number, if you told the first participant the number, you would risk some sort of, you know, potential bias in eliciting. You might be able to accidentally prime somebody when you're asking the second participant to report the number that they heard, if they heard a number at all, because they may be like, you know, reading facial expressions. They may be looking for some sort of nonverbal communication. So if this is something that you want to do, you'd have to put in some serious control measures. Like the one person feeding the number to the initial participant that's in isolation would have to be the only person that knows the number. The person that's retrieving the number from participant number 2, who got it from the magic gnome, would have to not know what the number was when they were taking it from that. Like, there's a lot of things that you need to take into consideration if you're looking for.
Well, the person giving the number wouldn't even have to know it. It could be randomly generated, or you could just put it in a sealed envelope. You hand it to the guy, the administrator, and the administrator give it to the guy. The guy opens it, and then he goes on DMT. You know,
somebody who
there's a lot of ways you can
would need to know is all I'm saying, but. Yeah, but it wouldn't have, the person who's retrieving the number or the person who's priming the participants would have to, like, there's a lot of things that you would need to put in place in order for that to not be called into question. So these are things that you want to consider. I'd be interested to see what happens. I don't think it's true, but I'm open. Like, if you do that and put all of the proper constraints into place, I'd read the crap out of that study.
Thank you. And also, if it shows that it's not true, it doesn't necessarily disprove my theory, but it is evidence against it. So we'd have to take that into consideration into our worldview as well. I have some other experiment ideas too, but in terms of that one still, when you were talking about the specifications, I actually have to make sure it's going to be held under more scrutiny than a typical scientific study because of the claims that it makes. So the field of consciousness research has a lot of bad juju with pseudoscientists and people like Dr. Emoto, who did the water study, where you guys probably heard of it, where these water, they did this study where they thought at water and sent it love or hate. And then it like looked more lovey or looked more hatey, but the study was bogus. It wasn't actually a real study. It was determined by the researcher. I mean, come on. Like, so I got to hold it up to some pretty high standards so people will take it seriously in the first place.
You'd need a lot of hypothetical constraints in order to make sure that.
Before we switch gears and move to the Stoned Ape Theory really quick, I want to ask what implications would that have on religion if it was shown to be true that these mechanical gnomes existed? Like, what would that mean for our religious institutions?
So, for anyone who doesn't know what the Stoned Ape Theory is, the Stoned Ape Theory is a concept coined by Terence McKenna that was originally conceived by Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World and The Doors of Perception, which inspired the band The Doors. Great author. But basically, the idea of neurotheology, or the Stoned Ape Theory, is that humans were similar in terms of their conscious capabilities to other primates at the time that, you know, we were around. But when we took natural entheogens, or natural psychedelics, it evolved our consciousness to the point to where we were distinguishable between other primates, and then we evolved our consciousness to be at the level of cognitive thinking that we are now. And there's actually some good deal of evidence for this. There so you mentioned religion. Actually, the oldest religious text, which is debated, but a lot of people think it's the Rig Veda from Hinduism, references the soma. And the soma is thought to be either a psychedelic mushroom, not psilocybin, but like a mardia, or to be like a mixture of cannabis and this other like weird botanical that I can't remember the name of. But that's in the oldest religious text, right? It's also in all other religious texts. Like in the Bible, the manna is commonly thought to be a mushroom. John Allegro, who was hired to translate the Dead Sea Scrolls because he was a respected anthropologist, concluded that Jesus was a mushroom, was never a person. He was literally a mushroom. Wrote the book The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, and he was immediately discredited as a researcher.
I'll read the book.
What?
It's crazy.
Jesus was the mushroom.
I like that.
Okay.
I would tell Christians that next time they argue with me about Jesus. Like, yeah, I pray to a mushroom too. They're like, what? Like, oh, it's true. Like,
yeah, Jesus, he's a real fun guy.
You trip too? Ah, that was good.
I've heard a lot of things on this program. One thing I've never heard is Jesus is a mushroom.
No.
Yeah, it's still hard to top
agree,
Jesus'
but I
foreskin
love it.
as the rings of Saturn. That still is hard to top.
Oh yeah, the foreskin. Yeah, that is.
Yeah, that one's hard to get over.
Even Santa Claus was considered a mushroom.
That's fucking amazing.
Oh boy.
That's actually true. The lore that referenced Santa Claus, there was a mushroom that came from your chimney and grew from the embers, and it would appear in your house. And so that's where the actual mythos of the Santa Claus legend came from. Well, at least people think.
Oh, man.
So religion is often compared to Santa, right? So Jesus and Santa were caused by mushrooms, and they're all often compared to, like, you believe in the Santa. Well, we all believe in psychedelics one way or another.
Am I tripping right now?
I want to know the first person that climbed up their chimney and said, "Hey, we got some fungus growing here. I think I'm going to eat it."
I just saw a meme where humans were eating mushrooms, and they were like, "Yes, thank God for trying all that."
Delicious.
So what is the? You talk about evidence for jumping back to the Stoned Ape Theory. What is the evidence that you're talking about when you say that there is some evidence that leans that way?
So some of the evidence where we were talking about a little bit earlier is the reference of psychedelics in a lot of ancient religious texts, but it goes further. So even before the conception of an original religion, I actually wrote like a 15-page thesis on this back when I was like first year in college. The psychedelic inscriptions of different memorial tombs, like I forget where the one was, but I could pull it up real quick, show even before the first written text, right? So not even before the Rig Veda, which talks about psychedelics, but even before the first written language, there is references of psychedelics on inscriptions and tombs and all kinds of stuff like that. And even cave drawings. So you guys have seen Ancient Aliens, right? Where they talk about how cave drawings are examples of extraterrestrials. Well, it's actually a false.
Garbage, please tell me that.
Well, no. It's actually, here's the thing. They're getting it wrong, right? So I don't agree with Ancient Aliens, but they're almost right. They're just not quite there. When it comes to the specific term,
they're not ancient aliens; they're modern aliens. That's the distinction. Yeah. Modern aliens.
Right about the time and the word ancient is a thing. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, not ancient.
So what Ancient Aliens claimed is that since there's these inscriptions on cave drawings that look similar to extraterrestrials coming to our planet, then there's likely extraterrestrials coming to our planet. They didn't, they just made a very direct jump. Well, here's the thing. In those regions, in these regions where there is these cave drawings of these extraterrestrials, there's a higher number of natural entheogens in those areas. So it makes sense that the people who drew those images were actually reflecting their internal psychedelic state. But it doesn't mean that they weren't interacting with interdimensional beings that could be considered extraterrestrial, but weren't actually in our physical material plane of existence. And that evidence predates written text as well. So when you have evidence of entheogens correlating with human activity before written text ever existed, and then it appears in the very first religious texts and still throughout modern believed religions like Christianity, as new as 2,000 years old, then you see direct correlations of the effects that entheogens have had on the development of human history and religion at the very least, and at the most, human consciousness itself.
Oh,
so they were drawing their trip.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I have a bunch of things. So I understand that you keep using the word entheogen. Entheogen is used in the context of when these type of psychedelics are used in a religious ritual, is generally when that term is utilized, because the context is different than if somebody's using them specifically for recreational purposes. So it's essentially context dependent whether or not you call something a psychotropic psychedelic or an entheogen. It depends on, the purpose that you're engaging in the utilization. They're not just for the sake of people that are listening, and I'm sure you would agree with me, and you had mentioned it earlier, there's not a differentiation that's meaningful from a psychotropic neurological level between something that's an entheogen and something that's a psychotropic. It's just it's a definitional difference based on the context when they're being used. You'd agree with that, probably,
I would
right?
agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. So when you mention entheogens, I'm on board with you where there was lots of natural entheogens, some sort of psychotropics around. Humans like to alter their states. I mean, I'm having a beer. Humans like to alter their states. If they find out that something's going to alter their state, there's a chance they'll alter it, and there's a chance that that'll influence their art. I'm all with you there. I think that that's all within the realm of plausibility. But when you jump from there to they could be accessing beings from alternate dimensions, that's where you lose me. Because why would you need to ingest why would you need to ingest something physically in order to alter your state, in order to access that?
Oh, well, it makes perfect sense in terms of the Stoned Ape Theory. If psychedelics are the actual catalyst for the development of human consciousness itself, then that would be the only tool that would make it to where you could access those dimensional landscapes through facilitation externally.
But even if you're looking at the Stoned Ape Theory, I could even, I'm not sure if I fully buy it, but I can see why it's plausible, because I think a lot of why we started to develop larger cortical structures is actually because we started to be able to cook proteins. Cooking proteins,
that's part of it.
Actually, yeah, cooking proteins viably, we have proved, has increased our cortical structures. So like that probably had a pretty serious effect on, influencing the emergence of consciousness. We could add using these psychotropics in as them altering our conscious perception in a fashion that heightened it to a certain degree. However, we can't genetically pass on that. Like if you altered your perception and experienced a conscious state that's heightened from the conscious state that you have, there's no way to genetically pass that on to the next person in your lineage. You can't pass on an altered state. You can only pass on the genetics that are predetermined for you. You can't fundamentally alter your genetic structure using some sort of psychotropic. So even if they elicited higher orders of consciousness for an individual, how, through genetics, did that pass on down the line and infiltrate the species?
Well, that's a great question. It's actually debated in the scientific community whether or not environmental triggers can actually be passed on to the next generation. And actually, the majority of consensual evidence says that it can, because there are gene switches that can be activated throughout your lifetime that change the genetic imprint that you would actually be passing on to your children. So I would say that it would have something to do with that. I'm not a microbiologist per se, but I do know that it's possible to pass on environmental stimulus.
You're talking about epigenetics. That's Steve's wheelhouse. Punching it to you, Steve. That's your wheel.
Yeah, because you can have, I don't know if hallucinogenics will methylate, but there are things called DNA methylation where you have a nucleotide that has a CH3 group attached to it, which can be passed on to future generations. Usually one or two, then it kind of goes away. Certain foods can kind of do that as well. So that is a passing along of traits in some way. They're a type of mutation because they're an epigenetic mutation. They're not a mutation of the actual base itself, like doesn't go to like a T to an A or G to C. But
right.
Are you saying that these are more like along the lines of an epigenetic change?
Well, I think that's one claim that could be made. I also think that I don't know if I would actually agree with this, but there is an argument that I will represent for the sake of representing it that Terence McKenna makes. He says that the brain is like a tuning fork, basically. And so we have access to these dimensional landscapes, but we are programmed to perceive the material world. So like kind of like how flies can see like 30 different colors. You know, there's a lot out there. We're not actually tuned in to see all of the stimulus. Entheogens naturally increase that. Well, he would say that extra dimensional beings sent us the mushroom to be able to phone home to them. So he actually thinks that they were placed here from extraterrestrial beings because they replicate, they spore, they, you know, for instance, they're 4-methylated, which is, mushrooms are the only 4-methylated species of organisms on the entire planet, so they're unique. So since they're unique, they reproduce quickly, they'd be the perfect, you know, thing to phone home to another dimensional landscape through consciousness. I don't actually believe that myself, but it's one argument that could be made. I like the epigenetics one more.
Or Drive.
Yes, oh, I love Star Trek Discovery. So, but when you use the analogy of, I mean, there's ants that can see forms of polarization in the atmosphere. There's an entirely different set of cones in the fovea of many species of birds, so that they can see more colors. But those are things that are measurable to us. We know that they can see more colors because we understand the mechanism by which their eye works. We know that ants can see polarization because we understand polarization. These are things that are measurable in our existent reality. So to say that because there's people or animals who are able to exist in a state of heightened perception of the reality that we're aware of, I think it's a big jump to go from that to thus there's a manner in which we can access a reality that we are not aware of and jump straight past the fact that we're just augmenting our cortical perceptions.
Well, we are aware of this reality, and I think that when you use an entheogen personally, you can subjectively experience it, but you can't verify it with any tool other than science, because when you have your subjective experience, I can't share that with you, which is why I want to implement research methods that could actually test these hypotheses if they were true, because based off of the evidence that I've presented earlier with the consistencies of the objective dimensional landscape, there is evidence that these dimensions could be objective. And so because of that, it's worth designing experimental measures that could explain the hard problem of consciousness, because science, as it currently stands, hasn't actually had a definitive answer to the hard problem of consciousness. And because there's no solid answer, this could be one unique and potentially plausible way to actually get that answer. And so I have a few other tests, but really the whole point is not the tests that I've designed that are mediocre at best, but getting people to get, you know, consensually down with putting these things up to test because it could be true. And there is evidence that it can be true. And it kind of fits into a worldview if you have like the whole thing put together kind of like a puzzle piece. So that's why I think it's worth additional investigation.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see studies on, you know, DMT and psilocybin, if for no other reason than to understand their effects on the brain. I mean, I look at it from a different perspective than you do. I don't yet buy into, I don't really feel as though at the moment, you know, maybe your study will change my mind. I encourage you to do your study, but I don't feel really yet at the moment that there's evidence that's compelling enough for me to buy into it. But
one of the approaches is that very thing, Shannon. One of the approaches to looking at these machine elders, literally the reason why, again, one particular viewpoint is that we have similar experiences would be on DMT, is because the brain chemistry is a specific way that there's certain universal things in the brain that are hardwired to exist, and these are patterns that we're seeing because we're all wired the same way, and these are just representations of those neural pathways, or I don't know the specificities of it, but it's basically because we all have the same biological thing, and these are just manifestations of our own biology that's causing it to be the case that we're seeing these things are similar. You know, and the one thing that I think is that if these things are multidimensional, if these things are actually really ontological entities that are autonomous, how is it that my question is, how do they follow along with us as we're moving along through space, right? I mean, there has to be, we're moving, you know, in one direction toward like what Virgo, we're moving around the sun. We are definitely moving through time and space. And yet, well, unless you're a flat earther, Kyle still doesn't.
Gravity! Have you heard of gravity? It's gravity!
So they have to still have they still have to be related to us somehow, right? And I'm all for the principle that we don't see the territory. I'm one of those big people that you look at. We have a map of the territory. We never get to look at the actual territory. We have no idea. This is our brains giving us images that we have processed to be the way we see it, right? Who knows what reality is actually like? We have no idea. I don't think we could ever know. I think it's epistemically outside of our realm. But if you posit that these hallucinogenics can give us a glimpse of more naive realism and more of the territory from the map, there still has to be some kind of physics connection by which we're seeing that realm, like wherever we are in the universe, right?
Right.
It still has to be connected.
I like.
There needs to be a mechanism by which we become consciously aware in our perceptions.
So I was actually debating with Ryan Price, who has been on this show before, and he claims that the standard model of physics and research on dipole movements of electrons shows that there's no interactions with the actual electrons and any other, variable, so that these dimensions are ruled out, in his opinion. So that would be one example of, an argument for your case. However, I don't agree with Ryan. I don't think that since the standard model has been shown to be not having the interaction of any external influences, it doesn't mean that these realms aren't actually real and objective. So I want to tell you what the shaman in Brazil told me when I asked a similar question like that. It had to be translated through our friend Pedro, and he did a remarkable job. So I'll be repeating a translation. But basically he said that these dimensions are not actual planes that we can physically travel to. So if we were to open like an Einstein-Rosen bridge, right, we would open a portal or a pathway into another point in our dimensional landscape, in our material realm. So we can travel to these dimensions, but we can't do it physically. So one aspect of conscious evolution is the ability to be able to access other dimensions. So it's in spirit possible to travel the whole universe. But where are these dimensions? They are within our consciousness. And where is consciousness? It is inside ourselves. So I do believe it's possible that these realms are internal and only accessible through the conception of consciousness, but not actually able to have a physical portal open to them. But however, I don't rule that out either. So I think that there is an interaction between human consciousness and the physical brain as a reception unit, but it's also possible that actual physical process takes place in a way that underpins our construction, our perception of reality. So it would fit within the standard model dipole electron movement experiment that Ryan brought up earlier. And in that sense, this is kind of the finishing point to this. A lot of people, when they think about God, they view God as being at the top, right? He's way up here, we're way down here, we don't even matter. And we're at the base dimension, right? That's the common conception. However, what if God is at the bottom, right? And we're at the top? And this collective consciousness permeates through everything from the base and up from that. And so through these kinds of... Yeah, exactly. So through these conceptions, that would explain the interaction.
Okay, I have a question.
I could dig that, actually.
Okay. So
I believe it's very heavily.
I dug it.
Dug it.
I'm with you, baby. I'm with you. I get you.
Oh, God.
We're there.
Stop
We're
it.
there.
Stop it right now. Okay, so since you're saying that essentially the answer to the hard problem that Steve just brought up there in that question is that they exist internally. So if they exist internally, isn't it just as plausible that by taking these drugs that augment your mental state, you're just activating a potential for augmented consciousness that exists within all of us through new cortical structures that would be experienced in the same fashion because we all have similar neocortical structures. So if you use the same substance, you're more than likely, since we have essentially the same neurochemistry, not exactly, like there's variation, which is why people have different personalities, for example, but the structures themselves are, we have localization of function. There's a lot of things that we know. There's a lot of things that we don't know. But could this not be in the realm of things that we don't know about the physical cortical structures that we're augmenting, as opposed to us accessing something external to us? Because it seems like in order for it to make sense to you, you have to push it back into the body, because we're not leaving our body in this state. Like we may perceive that we are, but we know we're not leaving our body. So wouldn't that be perceptually and even hypothetically just as plausible as the hypothesis that you put forth?
Certainly, I think that it's absolutely possible, and I definitely don't rule that out. Although I still don't rule out that we actually do leave our body this way rather than this way. But what's that even mean when we get into the fine details of the nature of how, the nature of how trippy the content we're talking about is. But I definitely don't think that that proposition is, unfeasible. I think that it's
that's
even
the one that's
potentially
more
likely.
interesting to me, because it means our brains do way cooler shit than we thought they did.
Yeah, it is. It's extremely. Either way, it's extremely interesting, and psychedelics warrant additional investigation. So I don't think that the theory you proposed is irrational at all. I just think that since we are unsure, both theories are worth investigating. So the propositional method that you proposed with the material explanation, we should investigate it. We should put research into it. We should have scientists working on it. The metaphysical potential explanation, I think we should also have people on too. That way we have the best chance of finding the truth.
So, going back to your analogy with EPR bridges, is that something similar to your thinking like Deep Space Nine, when they have like the wormhole and the aliens exist as as these creatures inside? Because by the way, I mean I believe EPR bridges actually exist, but I mean they're so small and they're usually between two black holes that have been in causal contact with each other, and they're very very small.
At the
and
Planck
anything
scale
through is going to cause it at the Planck scale, and anything that's going to go through it is going to cause the EPR bridge to collapse. But I do believe in quantum entanglement, that they do exist, at least in the physics, right? So I'm fine with that. But everything that I've read about the EPR in quantum entangled black holes shows that, one, they had to be in causal contact at one time, and two, anything that goes through it is going to cause a collapse of the state. So it really doesn't do anybody any good. But
that was just an example. I don't think you can go through one. Just like if you were to be able to and defy all laws of physics, then you would just pop out somewhere in our dimension. Not the machine elf plane. But if you did, that'd be crazy.
Well, that's what I was wondering. You think that the machine elf, like between point A and point B, when you're going through the bridge, that there's machine. Okay, that's what I was thinking. Deep Space Nine. If you knew the wormhole thing, you watched that series.
Oh yeah, no. The Einstein-Rosen bridge is within our dimension, right? And that's it. It's a material level conception.
Okay, I got you, man.
Super interesting stuff too.
Oh yeah, no, I dig this kind of shit. I could do this all day.
Yeah, so I think that covers the historical thing that you brought up, Kyle, when you brought up the Stoned Ape Theory, and we talked about neurotheology when it comes to Huxley and McKenna got a little bit crazy, but he still got some good stuff. And I definitely think it impacts religion a lot too, because if you were to be able to show that entheogens are responsible to the origin and conception of religion, how would religious people take that? Like, oh, my religion is actually, wait, Jesus was a mushroom? Wait, can you explain that all back to me? I mean, it'd probably just be a bunch of denial.
You would have a lot more religious people, actually. I would probably convert.
Jesus was a mushroom.
You gotta make it, man. You gotta make that.
Kyle's like,
Jesus
I've
was a
already
shroom. True Jesus.
Be a good title for this video, even though we only talked about it for 2 minutes.
Jesus was a mushroom.
Yeah, it would just be crunching to people. They'd be like, "Wait,
did you know that Beyonce was an energy vampire?"
Yeah, that's true.
I have heard that. The Illuminati videos and all that stuff.
You have heard that?
Yes,
oh,
yes.
Give me your energy.
We got to discover that in real time, Kyle and I.
Yeah, we had the guy that was taking us through why she was an energy vampire, and it all stems back to her coming out on stage going, "What's up, everyone? Give me your energy."
Oh,
and they did.
She's leeching it in from their souls.
Yeah, I guess it has to be voluntarily given.
You can't just take it.
Yeah, you can't. You have to be given the energy. You can't just take it as some kind of metaphysical law.
Right, like with vampires, they have to be let in.
Into your house. Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. Shannon gets it. She read what is it, Interview with the Vampire?
That is funny. Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to be representative of this field because there's so many crazies in it. Like I debate daily with flat earthers, and at this point I just show them a meme of the Earth with a big ass, and the Earth is just like, does this look flat to you? And that's my best argument against them. I don't even take it seriously.
No, we don't
there's a
take
lot-
flat Earth seriously.
A lot of
trust me.
crazies.
We really don't. But it is entertaining, and I like watching their, them flounder and flail and say stupid shit. So I enjoy that thoroughly. But yeah, we don't take flat Earth seriously.
What
No.
what other aspects of this do you want us to know, like in terms of DMT and consciousness?
So there was one thing that I read recently, which I think it does the whole conception of what the DMT state is, a form of poetic justice. So I'll just kind of recite it. I wish I had it on hand to read it to you, but I think I've got it. I've read it like 1,000 times. But basically what it says is, when you experience a transcendental state, your true self spatio-temporalizes into your three-dimensional body, and it becomes aware of all the conflicting energies, and it harmonizes them on a subatomic, molecular, and cellular level. And so this is actually a process that's known as Kundalini Awakening, and Kundalini has a negative connotation because, well, maybe it's not negative in the field that I'm in, but in other fields it's kind of viewed as pseudoscience. But it's a nice way of putting the actual process into conceptualization for people who've never experienced it. But I also would like to point out, throughout this whole time, I've been conflating spirituality with psychedelics. But if I want anyone who's listening to know anything, I want them to know that you don't need psychedelics to consider yourself spiritual. Psychedelics can open the door for some people and give you a breakthrough experience to kind of give you an idea. But really establishing an inner dialogue with yourself internally and not requiring any tools on the external level is the best way to maintain that transcendental state. Because if you depend on a psychedelic to be mystical or be spiritual or to have self-love even, then that's honestly a problem. It can get you there and it can be a useful tool for now and then, but you should really not, even though I think that psychedelics are spiritual, I don't think they should be used as a tool for spirituality exclusively. I think that has a lot to do with your own inner relationship with yourself, meditation, lucid dreaming, stuff like that. So if you're wanting to get into stuff, that we're talking about, I wouldn't say do acid every night to make yourself a monk or a guru, which,
damn it,
interestingly, yeah, right.
You had me up to that point. I'm done now. Forget it. Yeah, I was actually really interested, but so wait. So
I
it comes
wanted
to like
to
lucid
do
dreaming.
this so bad.
I have literally been able to self-induce about 4 or 5 times, self-induction to get into a lucid state on demand. It is not easy to do, but it is doable. And if you really practice at it, I really will tell you for a fact, it can be done. The transcendental, it works. You are in a lucid state. You are in a realm that, you feel like you're on a different planet. You have tactile sensation. You can hear things. You can talk to entities. I've talked to people, right? And you have conversations, right, and you're fully aware. You're like, hey, I've induced, and I don't know if you've done it, but it literally comes up to you like this, right? Like just like a movie. You're feeling yourself falling into it, right? You're in that induction stage, and all of a sudden the scenery just comes up like this, and you're like, oh, alien planet, cool. So I'm with you on that. I know that stuff does exist. I don't believe it's external though. I do believe it's all internal to the mind. But do you think that those are actually real places that you're traveling to? Because like I said, I'm convinced, without a shadow of a doubt, that those things happen. I've done it willfully, right? And dozens of times accidentally. But if I can do it 4 or 5 times willfully, that demonstrates to me that it's a real thing, right? And have you ever done it like without like sleep paralysis or just accidental? Have you actually self-induced into a lucid state or transcendental state?
Yeah, I actually developed a 5-step verificational method to guarantee a lucid dream that combines WILD, which is wake-induced lucid dreaming, where you go through sleep paralysis to get into a lucid dream. MILD, mnemonic-induced lucid dreaming, when you set reality cues, like you look at your hand twice to see if you're in a dream in the day. You'll do it in your sleep. Binaural beats, which can activate a lucid dream by making you in a more alpha state while you're sleeping, so it will regenerate your consciousness. Yeah, it's super cool stuff. And then also dream tubes do. So you can smoke something like Kaliazakatiki, which seems fake, but I promise it's a real thing. And it's legal as well. And Kaliazakatiki is a dream herb. It gives you a lucid dream. But yeah, I think lucid dreaming is not necessarily taking you to a real place like DMT does or near-death experiences does, but I think that it is an internal spiritual thing. But I like Jung's work on it, or Jung. So Jungian psychology does a lot of research into how archetypes are present within the dream landscape. So I think that dreams give evidence that there's a collective conscious that exists. If you ever read the Red Book by Carl Jung, or if you've ever read the Man and His Symbols, it talks about how there are these consistent archetypes that are experienced by different people within dream landscapes that shows that non-local consciousness is probably real. But I think that it's not actually a real place when it comes to dreams, but I do think that it can be evidence for a collective conscious.
Yeah, I've never done it.
Like you said, you had five things that could get you there. What are those 5 things?
So there's wild, which is where you go through sleep paralysis, right? So it's wake-induced lucid dreaming. And so you experience sleep paralysis and you trick your body into thinking that it's asleep, but it's your body's asleep, but your mind's still aware. So you picture yourself going downstairs or something, and then you'll just enter a dream state. But it's extremely difficult to do, and everyone just falls asleep. And sleep paralysis is kind of scary, but if you get used to it, you can deal with it.
Had them all my life. Since I was like 2 or 3 years old.
It's crazy.
Let me ask you a question.
People are terrified.
We have somebody, a good friend of ours for this channel. His name's Team Skeptic. He has a business where he does the sensory deprivation in the chambers where you're floating in the salt water and it's pitch dark. And it's sort of supposed to take you. Is that similar to the states that you're talking about now?
Kind of. So when you have sleep deprivation, or not sleep deprivation, when you have sensory deprivation, you can basically experience like a more quick experience of deep meditation. So when you meditate for long periods of time, there's this concept that you have when you reach a transcendental state that's based off of hypnotic imagery. So hypnotic imagery is like scenes that you see that are like they start off as colors, then they start to develop into images and stuff like that. That is extraordinarily expedited by sensory deprivation tanks. So you can reach a mystical state much more quickly and easily if you have one of those tanks. Because if you think about it, with meditation, you're trying to take away all of your environmental stimulus and just focus on your thoughts, really focus on nothing. If you have no sensory stimulus, that's a lot easier to do. So I would attune it to more of like a deep meditative state.
It takes away conscious distractions that allows. It takes away conscious perceptual distractions and allows you to focus on conscious introspection, which it sounds like a lot of this stems from. It sounds like what you're describing as a spiritual experience is internal introspective analysis. So, like listening to your internal dialogue, analyzing your internal dialogue, bringing into awareness your internal thoughts, and having conversations with yourself, analyzing them, those sorts of things. Those are things that are brought into awareness during meditation. Like you're essentially going down into a subconscious level to analyze your motivations, the things that drive you, the things that elicit those thoughts. So I'm all for that. I'm all for introspective analysis. I think not enough people do it. And I think one of the things that makes meditation so fantastic is that it forces you into that position where you're alone with your thoughts. And that's why it can have a calming effect and a beneficial effect to people. But I still just can't get to where it exists external of you, like, and where it's collective. Like even when you described Jung, like he would probably, I mean, I can't speak for him. He's dead, so he can't defend himself. But he would he would probably.
That's not a problem. We can get Soul Phone on the line right now if you want.
Yeah, I'll
call him right up, man.
Channel.
Yeah, Skype's got a new add-on to it. Soul Phone. You could just call.
Soul Phone, yeah. So
that's
when you look at the things that we experience in a similar fashion, or the things that we have access to conceptually and consciously, one of the things that we have to recognize and look at is that we're socialized within cultures, and because we're socialized within cultures, those cultural experiences are going to be reflective almost unilaterally when we have altered mental states. Like somebody who's never been exposed to a concept that's, a day-to-day concept in China, isn't going to experience it here, where it may be experienced in the same mental state in China, but something that's experienced day to day here, if you get into that altered state, is almost invariably going to be experienced in that altered state where it wouldn't be experienced in China. So when we go into these altered states, especially when you're looking at near-death experiences, I understand the archetypes, especially if we're going into memory access. When we're going into memory access, pulling out an ambiguous figure, for example, would be something that you would see everywhere across cultures, because figures exist across cultures. But when you get into the minutiae, like the finite details, I feel like it would probably be a little bit harder to pin down. Like, don't you?
Yeah, so there's actually another experiment that I want to run that I didn't even think about bringing up until you let in with that question. So you basically have a culture that has not been exposed to the physical world, and you find a archetype that they never would have potentially experienced, and you see if you can find an example of that archetype in their mystical states that they never would have been able to experience before. And there's actually examples of this. I forget the guy's name. It's Richard, but the last name's more important when it comes to these things. I don't remember that. But he was a professor at...
It's important, but I don't remember his name.
He sounds like a
he
dick.
was a
That one
professor
guy
at...
that did that one thing that one time.
Right. I
Oh,
think this
Kyle.
guy was Purdue. He worked with what was the other guy's name? He worked with someone. And I should remember his name.
He worked with that other guy.
Yeah, enough
Richard
specificities
is
here.
the guy.
You can be more generalized here if you want. It's okay.
Right.
You're
Richard
not
and
gonna know the
Bob
difference
also got
anyways.
mad because they both could be named Bob, and they would, get distracted all the time with it. So it created internal dialogue. But somehow they got together on this work. And David Nichols is the other guy I was thinking of. And basically this research showed that the guy... Well, it was kind of a research experiment, but it was in the 60s when LSD was legal. And so they gave it to a 17-year-old kid from like the ghetto area. And so he had not been exposed to a lot of, common cultural phenomenon. And so basically what happened was during his psychedelic state, he experienced the Hindu god Shiva and all her arms and all that stuff. And very accurately and descriptively throughout a long duration of the experience. And so in the book Sacred Knowledge, which this guy wrote, so I remember the book name too and his first name, but in his book, he basically said that this guy could never have seen Shiva before and he experienced it in a psychedelic state, but you could still make the argument, what if it was in a commercial or what if it was in a magazine somewhere briefly? Well, even if he had seen it briefly somewhere, why was it a predominant experience throughout a long duration of his psychedelic state? Now, this isn't conclusive proof, but it's a basis of the kind of archetype research that we want to do to be able to show that the collective consciousness exists.
I mean, like, Shiva's a pretty well-known concept. I mean, he existed in the world and had conversations. He could have been exposed to it. I'm not eliminating the fact that he could have, nor am I eliminating the fact that he couldn't have. But seeing a being, and that's when I would need to look at their methodology again. I would need to look at, like, were they asking leading questions to find out because they were excited about the possibility that it could have been something along the lines of a Shiva, and then they could report that.
Right.
And also,
if
you're looking, like how you communicate these things as a researcher, especially for self-report, is incredibly important. Because
did you see Shiva?
No,
did you see the Shiva god?
Right. No, it would be more like, did it have multiple arms?
I think it did. It did.
Was it female? Did you feel spiritual? Like you can ask leading questions that people are going to just give you yes or no answers for. And there's something called observer bias, where people want to please the people that are doing research, and they'll answer in the affirmative because you've studied research methodology. I'm sure you know all of these traps that you need to be able to avoid if you want your research to be held to a high regard and not open to as much scrutiny to people like me who are contrarians when it comes to these things, because I want to find truth. And you said something along the lines of, well, why would she be there? First, you'd have to establish that it was in fact her, and then you'd have to establish that there was a reason for fucking anything to be there at all. I mean, if it was just an augmented mental state, it could be random as fuck.
Right, but if it was random, it would be brief, right? This was for like half of his experience, apparently, reportedly. Maybe not half, but a large amount of it. So that's what was interesting.
If he became fixated because he found it interesting after it randomly popped into his mind.
Right, that's true. So now this is why it's not proof, right? Because you can make those conjectures.
I literally have saw this demon thing hovering over. It had the wings, it had the red eyes, and it had the talons.
Yeah,
and I was just, it was right over my bed, right? And I was staring at it, and I was fascinated by it, right? I'm like checking it out. I was looking all over and observing it. It wasn't like menacing, although you think it would be, but I was more interested because this was like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years ago. So I've had so many sleep paralysis by then, it doesn't really faze me. But I was checking it out. I was fixated on it, right? I was like, no, it wasn't until the only thing freaked me out was like a few seconds later, I heard this voice on the right, my right-hand side. It literally said, I heard a voice that said, "Why not?" That's the only 2 words it said. Why not?
Ah, interesting.
It was
audible hallucination.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. It was a low, deep voice, and it was kind of monotone, but it was why not?
Wow.
Oh,
well,
boy.
why not?
Oh boy.
Why not?
Why
not? You need a little less why not in your life, Steve.
I've had other ones too. I remember once. I this is a true story. I was sleeping on the couch.
A little less why not?
I was sleeping on the couch, and there's a picture above the couch, and it was a picture of these cows on a farm, right? Because my sister loved cows, and I was way back when in the 90s. I was living with my sister, but I was all of a sudden I saw the picture like this level. Like normally it was like this high, but I saw it on this level. And all of a sudden I heard a voice, and the voice said this, I'll never forget this: "Those kids are going to have problems." I have no creativity. This is what with Kyle. Kyle's a creative guy, right? He can make shit up on the fly, draw it, picture it, do oil colors, acrylics, whatever. He's just magic calendar when it comes to art. I got no imagination whatsoever. But I remember specificities like this because I couldn't make this shit up if I tried. You know, it's just my brain, for whatever reason, came up with these things, right?
Those kids are going to be messed up.
Those kids are going to have problems. I will never forget that to the day I did. This was back in the 90s.
Yeah. I don't even know what you said. That crazy. There's a side note. Brainy Beaver in the chat. Brainy Beaver in the chat said that they found Bigfoot prints in India. I'd like to tell you that I actually have someone coming on next week. This is one of the surprises, but she had an encounter with Bigfoot, and there's a name for there's a name for these people too. They're like Sasquan. What is the name of it?
Sasquatchians. Sasquatchians.
This sounds right to me.
I like
there's a term for it. There's a term for it. I can't think of what it is though.
Bigfootians.
Damn it!
I don't even know what's happening.
We've jumped the shark at this point.
Bigfoot, really? Stop it.
Help me out, guys.
No.
What's the?
We're gonna have to ask the live feed. I don't know. I'm
scavengers?
not. Scavengers?
No.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the son and the father years ago they actually showed how they did the footprints with the casting, and basically that was all resolved and it was all big one hoax. I thought that was all like taken care of.
Oh, the son and the father. I was thinking about Christianity, and I was really confused.
Yeah, it was Jesus making the Bigfoot tracks. Exactly. Yeah. What it was a toadstool that came to life, and then it made the tracks, and then it was crucified.
That's right. I remember. I saw that. I was there.
Or made it into a delicious dinner salad. One or the other.
Yeah, it was a crazy thing, man. I'm never forget. I mean, why not, right?
Somebody ate Jesus.
Map. That's amazing.
I'll figure out what it is. What it is here.
Okay.
I couldn't venture a guess if I tried, Kyle. I have no idea there was an actual word for that.
Sasquatchians?
Yeah, that sounds like the best guess to me.
Yeah, somebody said cryptozoologist, but I don't think that's what you're referring to. That's the people that study, things like chupacabra and Yeti and.
It's a I'll find it here in just a second. Anyway, Isaac, before we move over to super chats and questions from the audience, is there anything else that you want to put out there?
Sure. You asked me the 5-step method of lucid dreaming, and I just remembered I only listed 4 of the ways. So the last way is kind of cool. It's you ever wake up from a dream and then you continue the same dream after going back to bed, but usually it's pretty quick after.
Yeah.
So you
you wake up, you pause, you go do something, you come back, and you try to go back in the same dream.
Right, and you usually can.
Sleep,
so all you do is you alter the memory of the dream as if you were lucid. So you try to go back into it being lucid, and it's way more likely that you'll actually alter the dream's memory and go back into it lucid. So it's an interesting technique. You're literally lying to yourself on purpose to facilitate a lucid dream. And then within a lucid dream, we didn't really talk much about this. A lot of people like to satisfy their immediate material desires, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you can lucid dream, why not have sex with someone you've wanted to have sex with your whole life?
Wake up like that every time.
Right? Yeah, that's usually what people
every time.
do the first
it doesn't
time
matter. You're done. 2 seconds. I mean, faster than real life, but not by much. But still, it's it's true. What happens is you get stimulated. So basically, you're taking yourself out of that state, and so it lasts about a second or two, just like I said, real life. But you cannot have sex for very long in a lucid dream. I mean, anybody who's ever had a lucid dream knows this. What's the longest you've ever had in a lucid dream? 3 seconds?
The first
Squatching. Squatching is the name. Squatching is the name of the.
I would have never caught that.
That sounds better than what we came up with.
This is the tweet. It says, "I would love to talk with you regarding what I know and do with squatching as my hobby. That has turned me from a believer to a knower of their existence."
Oh,
squatching.
A knower.
Yeah, squatching.
I'd have him on, man. It sounds like some great convo. You guys could go for 2 hours.
Oh yeah, they're coming.
Yeah, count on it.
Okay, so let's read super chats and see what people think. If you have any questions, you can either super chat it or tag me in the chat as well. We'll try to get to a couple of those. Just waiting on this to pull up. Awkward delay. Okay. RJ says, "I'm sad because I'm flying."
Oh, I flew yesterday.
Is he having a lucid dream?
Oh yeah,
we fly lucid dreams. Yeah,
he meant flying as an airplane. I think
that's the best part of a lucid dream.
He's like soaring through the landscape of the interior consciousness, and he's sad about it, I guess.
Don't drink and drive, smoke and fly.
So I gotta ask, what's the best way to launch yourself in a lucid dream to fly? I mean, I usually get up on a fence or something and try to jump. I can't do any ground takeoffs. It's very hard unless I really jump. It's like, and then you're just kind of hovering. But it's really hard to actually. Usually, you have to jump off a cliff and you just kind of fly.
Yeah, I sink into the ground when I try to do that. So I usually ask someone to throw me who's next to me. I'm like, "Hey, throw me," and they're like, "Ka-ching," and then I just go after that. But usually, I need help. Otherwise, I just fall into quicksand.
Kyle, have you ever lucid dreamed? Kyle, have you ever had a lucid dream?
No, I have not.
No, really?
We'll fix that.
Talking about dream sex. That was it for me. I'm in my happy place now. I'm done.
I have vivid dreams.
I love
nothing that I would say was lucid.
Oh, you know a lucid dream when you have one. It's
I have horrifying dreams though. I have horrifying dreams. They're scary. That's why I would never take.
Flat Earth is true.
A psychedelic or anything like that because I know I'd have a bad trip. I'd be like Casey's friend. Casey had a friend that was high on mushrooms or LSD or something like that, and they were in this room where he was laying on his back, and this room had Christmas lights that were hanging down from the ceiling, and he thought that the Christmas lights came together to make a mouth in the middle of the ceiling, and was talking to him. I would die. I'd be dead right then.
I love that.
Dead.
That's the worst it gets. Scary. I can deal with that.
Dead.
Oh gosh.
Okay. So, Kuyas says, "I'm wondering if Steve's like Batman and has like 50 of those shirts in his closet." Steve. Kuyasa, be sure to include someone from the James Randi Foundation when doing the experiments, just in case.
He doesn't do the $1 Million Challenge any longer.
Yeah, he's retired. I tried to get him to come on the show, and he sent me a message and said that he was no longer doing interviews. Kit Hoven CPA, I want y'all to know I had 2 heart stents put in Sunday night. I thought I was a goner. I told the doctor to fix me because I want at least 1 more year of non-sec, and the Chiefs football. I love you all. Oh my God.
Oh, be better. Be better, Kent.
That is amazing. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Although I'm sure,
I'm glad you're okay.
I think maybe you should probably take a week off of this because this can't be good for your heart. At least take the Saturday nights off.
It ain't good for the mind, that's for sure.
Larry Walter Jr., for Isaac's study, wouldn't you also have to do basic tests on potential candidates looking for any existing neurochemical imbalances to ensure they don't affect any results?
Oh,
yes, there's two neurochemical imbalances that we would look for primarily. One is being schizophrenic. So if it's a risk of serotonin syndrome, like you were talking about earlier, Shannon. They activate the serotonin receptors. So if you already have a problem with that, we do not want to mess with your serotonin. Also, if you're on any prescription medication, specifically MAOIs, which MAOIs are, what's given with DMT, but it's different when you give DMT an ayahuasca MMOI, or MAOI is an RDMA MAOI. So that means that it breaks down very rapidly. It lasts about 12 hours. Actually, there's an MAOI in tobacco. It's why it's so addictive, and that's why people can't quit vaping, and they need cigarettes because there's an MAOI in it. Also, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, affect serotonin. So the MAOIs that are prescribed to you last 2 weeks, so they cannot be messed with DMT. So it's just prescriptions in schizophrenia for the most part. There are a few other underliers, but that's the main ones. So yeah.
So why are SSRIs not considered hallucinogenics? If you have less reuptake as a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, how is it? Again, not my area. Shannon, but aren't you having a higher concentration of serotonin because you're having less reuptake?
No, kind of, but no, not really. So
it's selective.
Kind of.
Yeah, exactly. So it's SSRIs only work. They don't engage in hallucinogenics. It's twofold. One, it doesn't affect the sodium ion channels. Like it doesn't go at the level of the soma receptor. So if you look at the actual cell body, the cell body will have, I think it's called an alpha-2 channel that is a sodium ion, and I can't remember if it's an antagonist or if it's neutral, but in DMT, it's about the cell potential. So the cell potential can produce and be more agitated.
The resting voltage.
Yes, that sounds right. Yeah. So I'm going from memory, so I'm really sorry. And I flew for 12 hours yesterday.
Or something.
Right. So with an SSRI, it's that you're still producing the same amount of, and you're still producing the exact same amount of serotonin you were already producing with an SSRI. It's not making you produce more serotonin. What it's doing is it's not allowing your synapse to take the serotonin that it's producing back. So it sits in the synapse that allows that receptor to once again open once it's absorbed the serotonin that's already sitting there. So if you produce too little serotonin or you're not able to receive enough serotonin, the serotonin that sits in that gap, your neural receptor isn't taking it, like the soma, the cell body takes it back up. The SSRI, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, blocks that reuptake. So you're still producing the same amount. It's just sitting there longer so that when your receptor is ready, you can take it in. It's not flooding the receptor. You're producing the same amount you were already producing. DMT will flood the receptor.
I was on SSRI once, decades ago. I thought it was Paxil. All it did was make me grind my teeth. And I told the doctor
too, by the way.
Well, it's funny. I told the doctor, I said, this is not doing a damn thing for me. I don't have depression. And I was telling him that I was grinding my teeth at night, like literally grinding my teeth. And his own words were, "That's not a side effect." The hell, it's not. Come to find out, it actually is a side effect. It is a side effect. Go look it up.
Steve, when you asked me about,
I'm like, yes, it was. I'm like, God,
right?
I didn't go back to him.
Back to this real quick. You asked me if I had a lucid dream earlier. Is a wet dream the same thing as a lucid dream? Because if that's the case, then
oh my God! I mean,
Christopher McClure left a super chat.
I guess one could lead to the other, but
William
Oh
Stout
my
said,
God.
Stoned Ape Theory. No, hypothesis is probably too strong of a word. How about Stoned Ape Musings? That's kind of
That's
cute,
why
actually.
we use neurotheology as the term, and that's the actual scientific literature is neurotheology, not the Stoned Ape Theory. But the
Well,
Stoned Ape Theory is a offshoot of it, so it's still
colloquially accepted.
right. And Terrence McKenna, remember who I said? Terrence McKenna is the guy that I said mushrooms are an extraterrestrial probe, right? He thinks mushrooms are a phone home ET signal. That's the guy who came up with the Stoned Ape Theory. So I can understand this guy's criticism. That's why I like to go with Huxley's foundation.
Cool. Well, that was a fascinating chat. I appreciate you coming in and having it with us. But let me sort of, and you can tell me where I'm wrong here, but I sort of wrote down a summation of what we've learned tonight. Okay. Consciousness is like Wi-Fi. We are the routers. Mechanical elves are really gnomes. God is a bottom. Jesus is a mushroom.
God is a bottom.
Yeah,
God is a bottom.
God exists on the bottom plane.
From the bottom
Right.
up.
Right.
Oh wow. Wow.
Say that
Wolf
and
just
that Jesus is a mushroom in the same line to a theist and see what they say.
wow. Wolf just left a substantial super chat. Thank you very much for that. He says that Mushroom Orthodox Church, God came to earth as a mushroom and people met Jesus Christ through it. Baptism included lucid dreaming, transubstantiation. Anyway, just before death, the human body needs to be flooded with DMT to ensure you can make the trip to heaven.
Sounds legit to me. I'll buy it.
Interesting. Thank you, Wolf.
Nice. Yeah. Well,
So he's
DMT
not
might be
agnostic
produced in
anymore.
the pineal gland at small amounts because it was found in the pineal gland of mice. But because of MAOI effect of DMT, it probably doesn't have much of an effect. If it does, it's slight. Like Shannon said earlier, it wouldn't be the main contributive factor, but it could play a little bit into it theoretically.
Is it true you can actually
theories about it having thalamic interaction too, which is really, really interesting because there's a lot of studies that show that the thalamus is essentially the brain's entry to consciousness. Like if you look at, there's some studies about conjoined twins who are joined at the thalamus that can kind of even though they have different cortical structures, are joined at the thalamus and they can almost share each other's thoughts and they can actually see out of each other's eyes. So that it's almost like the thalamaic bridge is the emergent point of consciousness, and the pineal gland is actually situated just above the thalamus. So if it needs small concentrations of DMT in order to elicit consciousness, that's plausible, which might be why when you activate serotonin in that region, you have heightened conscious experiences.
That's super interesting. Thanks for telling me about that. I had no clue that had happened.
Look at the thalamus, man. If you like this shit, look at the thalamus. The thalamus is fascinating.
Well, the thalamus is cool, but I didn't know about this conjoined twin thing. That's crazy.
Oh, it's very cool. Super cool.
Yeah, I'm writing that down.
I think is it true? And I don't recommend this. We're not saying go do this, but is it true that you can get DMT from like grass, like not marijuana grass, but literally like a lawn?
It's phalaris grass. Phalaris grass you can extract measurable amounts of DMT from, which grows everywhere in the country. But you can also join the Santo Daime Church or the
it's legal
what's the other one?
Like
it's the United Day Vegetal, and they are legally authorized to use ayahuasca, which contains DMT in the United States. I'm actually going to a ceremony in Maryland later this month to use ayahuasca legally, like out in the open, and it's all authorized by the federal court.
I thought that was in like New York or like New Jersey or something like that. Where's that?
Oh, they're all over. It's founded in Oregon, but there's some in almost every state. I actually want to start one in Ohio, which is part of the reason why I went to Brazil. Actually, I drank ayahuasca once with the dude that beat the Supreme Court case to get it legal in the U.S. And that was freaking awesome, dude. But that guy's my hero.
Did you puke it up?
What'd you say?
Did you puke it?
Oh, that day, did I purge that day? See, a lot of people try to avoid the purge. It was really part of the experience, but I don't think I purged that day. But usually, it's like 50-50, I would say, that the purge is part of the experience. And a lot of people want to avoid it because they don't like vomiting. But it's part of the esoteric, process, in my opinion.
I want to avoid the purge because I don't want people in scary masks to just shoot me for no reason. Did you know that Did you know that Hitler took the DMT, Mao took the DMT, and Stalin took the DMT, the DMT, the DMT?
Right. Well, they all have pineal glands and lungs.
Oh, come on! You haven't seen that Alex Jones video where they edited together that song?
Oh, Shannon, you haven't lived.
No.
Oh my
Are
God!
you talking about
Hitler
the
took
Bonnie
the
Bear one?
DMT. Mao took the DMT.
Stalin took the DMT. Oh, it's hilarious. Yes, an
No,
Alex
I
Jones.
haven't.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm writing that down too. Alex Jones is certainly an interesting character. I think that's all I want to say on that topic.
Probably
Let's
the
see.
nicest.
Jones
just look up
and Stalin DMT song?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The DMT song.
Perfect.
Alex
All right,
Jones.
I'm going to listen to that after this chat.
It's
fantastic.
catchy. It is catchy.
Okay. Once again, thank you for Isaac's channel. I'll link in the description. It's Lucid Truth. You can check that out. How often do you post content on there?
So Lucid Truth was already taken, so I added the to it. So until I get a copyright infringement, we're going with the Lucid Truth. I don't really think that's going to happen, but we'll see. But I post every Wednesday, usually at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next week, Rick Strassman is going to be on, who did the DMT research trials in the 90s and did the Joe Rogan documentary, DMT, the Spirit Molecule. So we're actually going to be giving him the things that I proposed to you. I'm going to ask him what he thinks, and this guy's actually a neuroscientist, so we'll see if he thinks that, whatever. Hopefully he, I think he has a little bit of a bias, but also he's in the academic profession, so he doesn't want to come off as too metaphysical either.
Sure.
Interesting.
Awesome. Well, make sure that Shannon ate a BLT, Kyle ate a BLT, Dave BLT. Very good, Steve. Everyone give Steve a round of applause.
Well done.
Shannon ate a BLT. Kyle ate a BLT.
You did a joke.
Okay, and of course, Shannon, thank you for joining us as well. Always lovely to have you. After this, you will be able
to talk
to
about brains without me.
You like your brains, yeah.
I would know.
Zombie.
I don't have much of one. I'm just here to make funny jokes and look pretty. That's all it's in my contract.
I spent a weekend with you. I saw you in action. I'm aware.
Shut up. Shut up. Okay. By the way, Dave, throw that picture up there one more time. Here in just a few minutes, you'll be able to catch live with Regis and I can't believe you didn't know who Hodakopy is.
Okay, shut up. No, I didn't. I thought it was a word. I didn't know it was a person.
You know what's funny? Casey didn't know.
I'm Canadian and I don't have cable.
I was telling people about this on Tuesday when Casey was here, and she didn't know who Hodakopy was either. And I showed her a picture. She's like, "Oh, yeah, I got it now." So yeah, you'll be able to watch the full 30-minute long attempt at Shannon and I trying to do religious trivia for the Atheist Edge. Jim has graciously given me the unedited footage. Okay, Dave. And then next week, you'll be able to catch me and Aaron doing the same thing. Although it took Aaron and I 10 minutes to do what it took Shannon and I 45 minutes. What is the independent variable there? I'll let you decide. But from all of us here,
you like to antagonize me like a dick face.
Right. Thank you once again, Isaac and Shannon and Steve, and as always, Dave. We'll be back here tomorrow with Saturday Night Fights, where once again someone will try to convince us that gravity isn't real, space doesn't exist, the sun is local, and we're all fucking idiots. Will he succeed? I doubt it. We'll give it.
Take a photocopy, folks. It'll last longer.